First and second vertebra, atlas axis, right?
Yeah, that's right up in here. Yeah.
It's amazing that he survived. That he was alive at all, I should say. That he was able to survive the event. First and second vertebra. What did we just talk about? First and second vertebra, that would lead to what? Quadriplegic, right? From C6 up, very likely is going to be a quadriplegic. Well, that's what he was. He was wheelchair bound here. The resulting cervical spinal injury paralyzed him from the neck down and halted his breathing. And so he has this respiratory vest on him that assists him. It's my understanding that his ultimate death was he was 52 years old. So 85 this happened and he died in 2004. Ultimately, he died from what are considered to be infections, decubitus ulcers. One of the concerns associated with a person who is paralyzed like this is there has to be this constant, any of you who work in healthcare or go into the nursing homes and things like that, the beds are usually these oscillating beds. They're just pneumatically moving these individuals all the time like that to prevent there being what they call the pressure sores or the decubitus ulcers. And it's my understanding, if I hope I'm correct in that, is that he had a number of those that developed, and then it just led to some catastrophic, infection process take place. I don't know if that's Snopes would figure that out at all or not. At any rate, he is considered to be quadriplegic. All right, now went to polio and poliomyelitis. Polio is a contagious viral disease. Okay, and what it amounts to is that there's essentially three different types of polio that's considered to be significant here. But anyway, it's a virus, and it impacts the capability of the ventral or the anterior motor horns. Okay, and it dominantly has proven to be impacting the lower extremities. Not entirely. There's people who die from this, and there's people who have the respiratory and the motor function of the arms and legs. But I've known there were three individuals that I grew up with. They were a little bit older than myself, but they all had polio, and it was lower legs. They had massive arms and big chests and very strong on the upper body, but no motor control in the lower extremities there. And in my practice, we were dealing with post-polio individuals as well, people who had polio, not a debilitating or paralytic type, but then had now, years later, as their immune systems were starting to fail, they were starting to show post-polio syndrome, which was another complication associated with this. But this influences, polio virus affects the motor neurons of the anterior horn of the spinal cord, the anterior horns right here, okay? Now, this isn't the white matter, this is the gray matter, right? Are you following me on this? This is the anterior horns here that are impacted, and that is going to be then motor control. Okay, again, neurological function, cognitive behavior, and things like that are not impacted. This is a motor response that's taking place. One of the more highly recognized individuals who had polio was Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Typically you see it as FDR here. He was 32nd president of the United States. While he was president, you never saw a picture of him standing at all. They always took a picture of him, but you couldn't tell. He was always photographed in his wheelchair. And so he contracted polio at the age of 39. He wasn't a child. And most of these, when you saw the polio cases like that, and I showed you some pictures, those were children here. But it is an enterovirus. It invades through the digestive tract, here, and then it impacts the spinal cord here. And again, you saw some of these pictures earlier associated with that. And there are many parts of the world, as I mentioned earlier. There's a chart I saw, but it was looking at an area in Africa and one in Western Europe that still had a significant number of cases, but North America, South America considered that we fairly well eradicated the polio as a result of the utilization of the vaccines, the Salk or the Sabine vaccine. Okay, some of you didn't do so well on when I told you. I said, you're going to want to know that chart. I said it would be a real good idea that you practice that chart. And you know it, and didn't go well. What are we doing? Let's try this here. We're going to have CNS up on top here. Let's do it real quickly here. CNS. Okay, then what do we have here?
PNS.
PNS, yeah, that's good. We're going to go to PNS. Now, the arrows for the CNS to the PNS, we're doing CNS, what would be, wait a minute, this is CNS to the PNS is going to be what? That's motor control. And then the other one is going to be sensory. So we have something over here, and what did we call that? Oh, this is going to be the sensory over here. But there's only one arrow direction on that. It's not a dual arrow direction, right? And then you had motor over here. And motor is going to be, no, that's not right. Motor is going to be that direction, correct? Mm-hmm. All right, so what do we have now? Are we all finished with this one?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You can put
You hope so?
afferent.
Okay, now we're going to go over here and we're going to do what? We got a couple of things that have to end up down here. What is this going to be? Autonomic? Nerve system, and what's the other one? Let's put somatic. How's that sound? We'll stop the bleeding here. Okay, we got autonomic, we have somatic. Okay, what else do we have to have then?
Sympathetic and parasympathetic.
Really? Where do those come in?
Under autonomic.
On here? We're going to go, what is that? Sympathetic? And this over here is, what did you say? Parasympathetic? Are we all done? You might want to add in here, this is what, voluntary?
Voluntary. Involuntary.
And this is involuntary? And the sensory over sensory afferent? S-A-M-E. So how'd you do? Not well. What needs to be done?
Somatic and parasympathetic. That's the one I forgot.
Okay. Central nervous system is dual communication. We have motor and sensory, but the sensory is only one pathway from peripheral nervous system up. Motor is just all cascading downward from here. Sensory and motor, and then motor to the autonomic and motor to the somatic. This is going to be your skeletal muscles. This is going to be cardiac muscles, smooth muscles, glands, things like that that are being impacted. Sympathetic, parasympathetic. Okay? Well, we'll see how that went. My first glimpse of them didn't look real promising, ladies and gentlemen. All right, let's get on with this other. I'm on chapter 14, information now. What else do we have here? Well, we were just looking at, oh, wait a minute. There's a piece about the essay question information. I gave you just one sheet, two questions there, or two things that you're going to have to respond to both of them. It says, describe the components of and an explanation of a reflex arc. They have to be in their correct order, and you have to be able to explain what's going on in those phases. And that's going to be part of what we're going to be addressing when we have the lab session on Monday. We're going to be dealing with reflex as well. And the second one, describe the cross-section of the spinal cord, which is essentially that stuff. And be sure to identify the significance of the white matter versus gray matter and the functions performed there. Okay, so that's going to be your essay question for the next lecture exam. And the lecture exam comes up on, the 12th. That's kind of like a week from today, right? I'm trying to figure out why I'm handing these things out, okay? A week ahead. I'm trying to figure out why I'm handing those things out. Please use that to your advantage to see if that might make a difference. Okay, let's take a look at this. Where was it that the polio impacted? What was it? The posterior horns. You think so? You just misled the entire class here. What is it impacting? Anterior or ventral horns. This area right here. Jade. This area. This is anterior. We're looking at anterior. How would we know this is anterior? Because they have this little gizmo back here called what? Dorsal root ganglion. Dorsal is going to be posterior. What is the dorsal root carrying? Dorsal root is carrying anybody look at this since the last time we met? Come on, guys.
Sensory.
What is it?
Sensory.
Sensory. It's carrying sensory information right there. The dorsal root is carrying sensory information, and the ventral root here is carrying motor. Yes. We're going to have sensory, motor. When you get out here, remember I told you it's like some authors say there's like a 2/3, 1/3. When we look at these features here in the white matter, we talked about those as being they're using a term funiculus. They're white columns. They say posterior funiculus, anterior funiculus, lateral funiculus. Okay, anterior, here's posterior, here's lateral. And then one of the other illustrations we'll show here. So this is showing this embedded within the vertebral foramen right here. Here's the body of the vertebral frame, the body of the vertebra. Here's the spinous process. When you look at that one right away, you should be able to tell where that one would be located, right? What would be your first guess on location of that particular vertebral segment? It is a vertebra, yes. Where? Where would you identify it coming from? Two things should be giveaways on it.
Spinal.
Well, yes, it is spinal there. So what's the giveaway? Two different things you should be looking at. Say, I know where that one came from. Well, one of those that we talked about, it has a bifid spinous. There's a bifid spinous right here, and there's a transverse foramen right here. So that should be your giveaway for where it's located. Where is it? Cervical, yes. It's going to be cervical. It's going to be the cervical vertebral segment. We don't see the bifid spinous in the other vertebral segments, and we certainly don't see transverse foramen. Now, what's the purpose of the transverse foramen? What's passing through there? The vertebral arteries, okay? The vertebral arteries are passed through. They're going through the vasculature of the inferior portion of the brain there, okay? All right, so we're going to see, this is the illustration I want you to kind of focus on here. We're seeing the blue here is supposed to be, we talk about ascending. What's passing in those tracks? What is it? Sensory information. And then we have the red representative of the information that's going to be, we talk about the descending tracks. Okay, descending tracks are carrying the motor. So the motor versus the sensory. And so this is like 2/3 of the, you look at it and you just say, well, there's a whole lot more blue than there is red. And most of the authors of texts like this say that's about 2/3, 1/3, 2/3 sensory, 1/3 motor. And all of this is going up, and it's, remember we talked about almost all of that sensory input other than nose and eyes are being processed through the thalamus. Remember that? The thalamus is screening that information, and then it's giving us some commands as to, what are you going to do with this stuff, Bucky? Okay? Now you have to decide what the decision is going to be relevant to that. And we also talk about some of these decussation areas here where we're going to have a crossover, as in this instance that we see in the cases right here. Now, anytime there's an arrow going up, you have to consider that that's going to be associated with what kind of information? The sensory, yes, exactly. It's all going to be identifying sensory information. And when you see the title of these particular areas where they say spinocerebellar, the origin and the final destination. So coming from the spine, going to the cerebellum. Okay, and so we're going to see spinocerebellar over here, spinothalamic over here, from the spine to the where? To the thalamus, yes, you'd be identifying. Now, these are some red pathways here, okay? And again, we're making reference to them as being called tracts. And so these are identified as being descending tracts here, and we're seeing that rubrospinal tract here, starting in this particular area, going down the spinal area. And they're showing cerebrum, midbrain, cerebellum, the pons, medulla oblongata. That doesn't sound like a continuum. You go from the midbrain to the cerebellum, and then the pons. What that means is that we have to take a detour posterior to get to the cerebellum, because the midbrain and the pons and the medulla oblongata they're in a straight line, but the cerebellum is posterior to those. Are we following this? Okay, and so in order for this pathway to go from the midbrain to the cerebellum to the pons, we're taking a little bit of a detour to say, hey, we're going to check in with the cerebellum for balance and equilibrium stuff associated with that message. Okay, and here's just an actual dissected portion of that. Here's that cauda equina. We talk about the cauda equina, the horse's tail, okay? And then the conus medullaris, the cone shape, and then the cauda equina. And then the phylum terminale is just this real tiny thread-like presentation of connective tissue there that's supposed to be almost like it's holding that thing in place here. All right, we talked a little bit about where you have the spaces, the dura mater, the arachnoid, okay, and then we made reference to, in this particular case here, a lumbar puncture needle. If you were going to go in there and you were going to try and get cerebrospinal fluid from there. Okay, remember there's serous fluid on the outside by the dura, and then we go deeper into that area and we're going to find cerebrospinal fluid. So you have two different types of fluids that are represented there. This is once again one of those illustrations where we see the dura mater, the two different distinctive layers associated with that, and then the arachnoid, and then the pia mater that is overriding the gyri and the sulci associated with that. Now, one of the things that we didn't experience was this material called the dura. There was no dura on any of the brains that any of you were doing the dissection on, so we were right down to the actual pia mater there, and the brain sections on the sheep that we were looking at were representative of what we see right here. Now, I want you to pay attention to this. This is going to be really important in the material we're going to cover here in this chapter 14, and it's called the homunculus. The homunculus, and notice what we have here. This is on the precentral gyrus. Are we good with our precentral gyruses? Here's the image of the brain. Here's the central sulcus, okay? You follow that? You go anterior to the central sulcus and you are in the okay? Try and get the terminology correct here, because this is one of those things that's going to kind of trip you up here. Precentral gyrus. Remember the gyri are the hills? Okay, if this is the central sulcus, we go pre-central gyrus. That's the hill before the central sulcus right here. Or we go to the post-central gyrus. That's the one that's back here. And I demonstrated that in the lab on Monday. I said we had the blue and the red on that model, that huge brain model that was on the front desk there. And I said, here is the red portion, that's motor, that's primary motor, and this is primary sensory. So before that, and so this is supposed to be representative. This thing, this little man as it's called, is supposed to be representative of the impact associated with the motor cortex, the motor response, and then post-central is supposed to be representative of the sensory cortex. And so what we see is, okay, do you need a whole lot of sensation on the arm and trunk or areas of the body like that? Maybe not, but look at the size of the hand. And definitely look at the size of the face so we see the amount of sensory input we get from the facial area here, those sensory nerve endings there. A lot more sensory nerve endings here. And then you go all the way down, the teeth, the gums, the tongue, the pharynx, the intra-abdominal, not so much. But the face here and the hand, just huge. Now let's go over to the motor control portion of it. We're on the primary motor cortex right here. And notice again, there's always this kind of discussion about people like to have a face-to-face communication with a person. They'd rather be one-on-one with an individual. Why is that? We get a lot of communication, facial expressions, nonverbal stuff. Am I registering anything here? Does that sound familiar? Yeah. Okay, so here's the type of thing. We get a whole lot of communication that can take place here without even saying anything. Really? Oh yeah, okay. Huh. Or you can be the poker face and not give away anything. So this is identifying the motor control for various different areas of the body and how significant it is. The hands, the amazing opposable thumb, the digital dexterity we have, fine motor skills, gross motor skills, things such as that in the hand. Look at that. But it also relates very much to the sensation in the hand as well. So sensory and motor. And then the facial area with the motor control here. But we also see that there's a substantial amount of sensory impact we have here. But, in this area, the rest of the body here, not so much. The homunculus, you're going to have to pay particular attention to that. Are you familiar with gyri and sulci now? Does that sound familiar? All right, here is our central sulcus. Now, they haven't highlighted this pre-central gyrus as boldly as what we see in this one, where it's just really brilliant red here. But then this is going to be, we're still going to call this motor, but it's not the primary. This is the primary, and this is the primary somatosensory area here, okay? Post-central gyrus. And then we get to the occipital lobe, and then we get to the temporal lobe here, parietal lobe, and then occipital lobe right over here. All right, and then we moved inside, and we were talking in terms of the various different divisions here associated with going down toward the spinal cord here. Okay, so all of this is material that we've covered in the lab, and a little review here. We're going to cover some of it again in our information this evening. Okay. All right. Okay. We have here, this whole chapter is identified as the integration of the nerve system functions. Integration, how do they work together here? How do we have, in this case right here, we're seeing are likely some motor sensory type of references that are taking place. This identifying, again, they don't use the same color combination here, but we're making reference. If you just looked at that, you should be able to say, oh, that's representing motor. Would you agree with me on that? Yeah, because it's pre-central gyrus. Okay, and then the green over here, and then we're seeing a whole lot more green than we are, whatever color you want to call that. So motor sensory again. Somatic motor pathways, voluntary reflex control, skeletal muscles, provide general sensory information, touch, pain, temperature, areas of the body through the spinal cord to the brain. Okay, so integration here is really important. We're going to talk about nerve system involves the communication of sensory information and control of the effectors through specific motor pathways. We have to have those two working together here. So sensation, an important term we have right here, process initiated by stimuli acting on sensory receptors. Perception. Are you able to perceive the temperature in the room here? Yeah, hot, cold, frigid, whatever it is here. The senses are the means by which the brain receives information about the environment and the body. General, we have general senses and we have special senses. As we move through the last portions of the 244 information here, we're actually going to deal with some of these other more specific things here. Distributed over large parts of the body, our receptors generate action potentials. That should be a familiar term to you. Generator potential. It's going to travel to the brain. We're talking about sensations. So those are going to be, you have to think in terms of those are ascending pieces of information here. Somatic has to be a comfortable term for you. When you hear somatic, about the body and the environment, okay? The soma of the body. Touch, pressure, temperature. Here's a term that you want to get real comfortable with. If that term kind of tripping you up here, make sure before you leave today that you got a good handle on proprioception, okay? And pain. Proprioception, the sense of the body, position, and movement, okay? The sense of the body's position and movement. Proprioception, you're able to tell if you're listing or leaning or you're ready to fall over or something like that. Proprioceptive sensation. Visceral, I've tried to impress on you, visceral you should always be thinking about gut. So what's going on in the gut here. Information about the internal organs. And the visceral sensory responses, pain and pressure. You got gas, feel like you're bloated, hungry, overstuffed, okay? All right, things such as that. The special senses. Don't think about those very much at all, probably, but smell, taste, vision, hearing, balance. Okay, those are called special senses that go beyond these other ones that we have here. Occur in special sense organs, and we have a whole unit on just those. The receptors produce a receptor potential. That's what brought up here, the generator potential. And the receptor then releases a neurotransmitter. That should not be a surprise here. If this receptor gets a signal and we want to get that signal to higher level functioning areas of the brain, we need to have a neurotransmitter that's going to send the signal along here. Binds to the receptors on the membrane of the neuron, which then travels to the brain. You got to start this action potential, get it moving along. So this is the chart that's on your papers right there, and we said the senses, receptors distributed over a large part of the body. General, skin, touch, pressure, proprioception. There's the one I told you. Got to get comfortable with. Temperature and pain. Visceral, the gut, pain and pressure. Special, smell, taste, vision, hearing, balance. Those were all capsulized, and now they're kind of laid out for you in this, just highlighting a flow chart just with senses. Now, interestingly enough, these are all, our flow chart goes down, but we say pain has to go here, and then general senses, we're going to carry it up to the brain. All right, this kind of a collection here is going to break out those things. Here's another one that you need to get real comfortable with. We're going to cover that. Nocioceptors. Nocioceptors. Those are typically identified for pain. So get comfortable with nocioceptors and proprioceptors. All right, the sensory receptors here. Type is based on the stimulus they detect. Now, has anybody ever chewed on some tin foil, either intentionally or accidentally? You pop a little Hershey's Kiss in your mouth and you're chewing on it, and dang, I didn't get all the foil off, right? Do you know you got foil in your mouth there? You're chewing popcorn and it's a kernel there, it's not the popcorn. You know right away, correct? How so? Mechanoreceptor. A mechanoreceptor is not popcorn, not chicken, that's a bone. Okay? Not Hershey's Kiss, that's foil. Do you follow what I'm talking about? A mechanoreceptor there, compression, bending, stretching of the cells, touch, pressure, proprioception, hearing, and balance. We have those that are goofy examples I just used right there are mechanoreceptors, mechanically changing something. You cinch the belt up too tight around your waist, and you're getting a mechanical compression there. Mechanical. Identify mechanoreceptors then. How about a chemoreceptor? Anybody like sauerkraut? other than myself, I guess. I'm the only one.